Hey guys, my name is Yasmina and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to share with you my favorite classic books of all time. Now, I definitely don't read as many classics as other genres, so my collection is rather small, and I actually don't own a lot of the books that I'm going to talk about today because I used to own them. They were very old, battered editions, and I decided to get rid of those when I moved into this place just to get more space, and eventually I really want some really nice editions of these books. So without further ado, here are my favorite classic books. The first book I'm going to talk about is one of the books that got me out of the biggest reading slump I've ever had. I basically did not read anything for about 2 years, and this was one of the first books that I read after that huge reading slump that got me back into reading, and that book is The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I decided to pick it up because I'd always loved the story of Sherlock Holmes and I always wanted to read the source material, and I did, and I loved it. Sherlock Holmes. What is there else to say? I think you all know what Sherlock Holmes is about. I really love the story. I love these characters. Also really like the adaptations. Pretty much all the adaptations that I've seen, either TV shows or movies, I've really enjoyed. It's just a fantastic overall character. Then we have a newer addition to my favorite classics as an author. I started reading this author, I think, last year, and now I really want to get my hands on everything she's written because I loved And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, and I've also read Murder on the Orient Express, Queen of Mystery. I totally get why she holds that title. These are fantastic. I especially loved And Then There Were None. There was just something about the atmosphere and the plot of this book that was just so expertly done. It was like chef's kiss. So good. I really need to get my hands on all of her books because it's just a fantastic sort of cozy mystery. I think this one is definitely a lot more gruesome. Like there's a lot of gruesome details in it. This one was mild in comparison, but still really interesting to follow the investigation. So of course, these are thriller mysteries. I don't think I need to say more because I think everyone knows what Agatha Christie writes, but I would wholly recommend this one to start off with if you're interested in reading Agatha Christie. I think this just takes the cake. It's so good. Then we need to talk about Jane Austen because Jane Austen is a legend, and I have this tiny book here. This is the only Jane Austen that I still have on my shelf because I bought some really cheap editions that I didn't like of Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility, which are the two Jane Austen books that I read, and then this small one is Lady Susan. This is a short story. I loved Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility. I do think Pride and Prejudice was my favorite. Her characters are fantastic. Some of the lines in those books are just iconic. I mean, even just the opening line of Pride and Prejudice is one of the most famous opening lines ever. She has that wit, that's really subtle wit and comedy that might pass some people by, but once you get it, it's so good. I definitely need to get a full set of her novels, like a really nice set edition of her novels to display on my shelf. And speaking of Jane Austen, I also have to mention Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Of course, I love this novel. I think I like this more than the Jane Austen books that I've read. Again, there's something about Bronte's writing in this one that is so atmospheric. Especially really love and just remember clearly the beginning of this book when she was at the orphanage. I still have scenes from that book playing in my head every once in a while just because it was so, I don't know, it was just so well written and I just remember those very clearly. Then of course I have to mention The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. I have read all of the books in this series, or most of the books in this series. I will insert a clip from my childhood bookshelf tour where I have this series. Okay, these 4 are easy because this is the first 4 books in the Chronicles of Narnia. I should actually have the whole set. I'm not sure why. Do I not have the whole set? I thought I had the whole, Chronicles of Narnia set, but I guess not. I read mostly fantasy, and so of course I have read these, and I have enjoyed them as a child. I have not reread them since I was a child, and I think it definitely requires a reread at some point. At least the first book. I cannot make this video without mentioning these books, and that is of course The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien and also The Hobbit. Especially this one, this is definitely a childhood favorite. I've reread this a lot of times and loved it every single time. So much of the fantasy that I read and love today has its base in Lord of the Rings. Without these books, I doubt a lot of the fantasy that we have today would exist. Tolkien did not invent the genre, not even close, but I think he established some tropes that are still being followed to this day. And of course, he spurred the whole Tolkien era of fantasy in the sort of 70s and 80s, where every single fantasy series that came about pretty much mimicked The Lord of the Rings in their own style. And at some point in the 90s, there was like a renaissance of reinventing the fantasy genre and what it means by people like George R. R. Martin specifically. I absolutely love these books, of course. They're one of my favorite fantasy of all time, so of course they had to be in this video. Then I want to talk about 1984 by George Orwell, because Orwell is one of my favorite authors of all time. I adore his writing style. I actually really love his nonfiction as well. I read quite a lot of his nonfiction, but 1984 obviously is a masterpiece. It is scary how well this book predicted our modern society, and a lot of the pop culture terms we have today, like Big Brother and 101. There's a lot of terms that actually come from that book that we still use today to describe these sort of totalitarian systems. Really scary stuff. Fantastic book though. And in general, I adore his writing and I want to read everything he's written, especially his nonfiction. Then I have The Giver by Lois Lowry. This is kind of a dystopian novel. I think it's one of the first dystopian novels ever. And this actually came out in the 90s, I think, so it's not that old. Yeah, first published in 1993. So surprisingly, I think this is definitely the newest book in this video. And I think it's considered a classic because of the themes in this book and the way it sort of catapulted like dystopian as a genre. We wouldn't have stuff like Hunger Games or The Maze Runner or those kinds of books without this one. And it's also a really short book. It's a series, but I've only read the first one. Since it's written in the 90s, it's quite a modern style of writing, so you'll have no issues getting through this. Then have A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, and I absolutely love this book. It's also a very small book. I think I read it about 2 years ago on Christmas Day, and it is fantastic. Of course, I knew the story beforehand. I've watched countless, adaptations of the story, but the book itself is amazing. And if you want to read Dickens and you're intimidated by his huge novels, then I think this one is definitely worth it. Dickens writes really beautifully and also with kind of a lot of humor, I think, and it's really nice. I really want to read more of his books, but I think this on a Christmas day with a nice cup of cocoa or coffee or tea is amazing. And the last two books in this video I am a little bit unsure of. The first one is The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. I've read this 2 times, once as a teenager and once as an adult, and I loved it as a teenager. I read it in Romanian when I was like 15, and then I read it I think 2 or 3 years ago and could not stand it. So I'm really torn about this book because on the whole, I totally understand what it's doing. I just could not stand the main character. And so I'm very conflicted because I like the idea of this book. I like what it's trying to do. And I loved it as a teenager. I don't know, maybe down the line I'll reread it again and maybe I'll find the goodness in it that I did when I was a teenager. And then the last book in a similar fashion is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Everyone loves this book, like everyone. If you ask a large group of people what their favorite classic book is, I think most of them will answer with The Great Gatsby. I did like it. I just have mixed feelings about it. It's about these really posh people doing posh things in the 1920s. I don't know how else to describe it. The movie of it with Leo DiCaprio is really, really good. I really enjoyed that version of it. I think the characters are a bit insufferable, and I know that's the point. I think it's very similar to The Catcher in the Rye, where I just don't enjoy the characters in this, but I really like the plot and I like what these books are doing, the social commentary that they're doing. I just don't like reading from these characters' perspectives, and so I'm a little bit torn, but I definitely really like these books, and I think these are definitely books I will reread throughout my life and try to sort of see them differently depending on, which point in my life I am in, if that makes sense. But that was it. Those were all of the best classics that I've read and enjoyed, and like I said, in general, I need to read more classics. I definitely need to read more Jane Austen, of course, because I already know I love her writing and there's plenty more novels of hers that I haven't yet gotten to. But if you have any recommendations based on the books that I've shown in this video, if you have any other recommendations for classics that you think I might like, please leave that in the comment section below. I would really love to check them out. I definitely have a lot that I really want to read. But obviously, you know, an extra push from one of you guys, if you think I would really enjoy them personally, that would definitely make me want to pick them up sooner. Yeah, and let me know what are some of your favorite classic books, classic authors. I think that's always really fun to discuss. And in the future, after I've read more classic books and found more favorites, of course, I will do an updated video recommending even more classic books to you guys. But yeah, I think that's it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and otherwise I will see you next time with a new video. Bye!